everybody, welcome to episode 6 of the Jumps Show's Cheltenham Festival 2023 Ante-Post build-up. Thank you very much indeed for the continued support so far on this channel. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Please do help out the channel by liking and subscribing. We'd love to hit that 1,000 mark by the Cheltenham Festival. With the Cheltenham Festival very much in mind, the Dublin Racing Festival took place last weekend, a true feast, a veritable feast of racing, so it was. And the first race we are going to look back on is the Nathaniel Lacey, which of course is the 2-mile, 3/4 novice hurdle. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but good land did win for the good people. I have not heard, well, I've heard that phrase far too much over the last week or so. But indeed, Goodland did win, and he won very impressively as well. He didn't get the entry in the Albert Bartlett. Turns out, Barry Connolly said afterwards, he's got too much speed for that race. He's too classy a sort for the longer trip. So back in trip he goes, and I can't wait to get the views of the lovely panel here, both Dan Overall and Jake Price. Gents, I hope you're very well indeed. Great to see you as always. Dan, should we start with you?
With pleasure. This was a bittersweet one for me. Like, obviously, episode 1, I eulogized about how I thought Goodland was a serious horse, and I thought that maiden hurdle was very strong over Christmas. Sometimes you can be right but be wrong at the same time, and this is very much one of those instances. Like, it was a great performance. I thought he's just a very professional, uncomplicated horse. Travelled up well, jumped well, powered away, and he does have speed. But I really remiss the idea that the Bartlett can only be won by slow horses. Like, Ginto was going to absolutely hack up in the race last year, and he won over 2.5 and had plenty of pace. Like, it's a boring stereotype to consider the Albert Bartlett just a 3-mile plotters race. It has changed in recent years, and he would be favourite for it if he was going to go. So that means for my Ante-Post, but I still get £0 back, though, and rather annoyingly. But a lot to like about Goodland. I'll be a fan of the horse for as long as he continues, and he's an interesting player in the Ballymore. I do think he'll find one or two too good in the race of that nature, but he deserves his place there. And I say the form behind is interesting. You've got a few that probably will be Albert Bartlett bound. Maybe Cool Survivor might end up in a pipe being a Gigginstown Elliott horse who's had his 4 run over hurdles. It's an interesting little race, but yeah, Goodland, smart horse, but he's one of those where I just feel like I've lost out on something so precious.
Yeah, they're always really sad, aren't they, those ones? Very sorry to hear that, Dan. I do feel for you, but I'm also thinking, should we get the violins out? Jake, what about you, mate? What do you think of Goodland?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction really was, I just wish he was in the Bartlett. But then having looked back at the race, seeing the time of the race as well, it actually stacks up quite nicely. And it does look like he's a horse that's beaten a couple of stayers using his toe, really. Yeah, I thought it was obviously a very nice performance from the front. It's a great ride, and yeah, I think he does have the speed for a Ballymore. Whether he's got enough speed to beat the likes of Impair at Pass or something like that, or Gaelic Warrior, who's seemingly going to go for the race now, it remains to be seen. But I think it was good. In behind, you've got Absolute Notions, who unfortunately he's only had 3 runs over hurdles, so he doesn't get that Martin Pipe qualification just yet. I'd imagine they won't have time for it either, so it'd probably be Albert Bartlett for him. He plugged on nicely, didn't really make too much an impression. I thought that Cool Survivor, the one that Dan mentioned, he was probably the eye catcher of the race. Really, he was last, rounding the home bend, managed to fly on through the pack, and was only beaten 4.5 lengths into 4th. So that's a nice piece of form there. And I'm sure I would imagine that he would rather go for the Bartlett with him, but they've got 3-card Bragg, and they've got some others that could go for that as well. So it'd be interesting to see how Gordon shapes up his divisions between the Bartlett and the Pipe. But yeah, it was a very nice performance from Goodland, and fair play to those people that have supported him all along.
There was an article today actually in Racing TV actually said the Pipe is more likely for Cool Survivor. I think given the qualifications, and he won't have that many qualified, it would, if you've got one ready, I guess it would make sense to go that way.
Yeah, and they love to have one ready for that race. Yeah, I was disappointed with Sandor Clegane. I was all over him to try and win that race, but he ran well, to be fair, but just wasn't quite meant to be. Right, moving on to the Spring Juvenile Hurdle, which saw, well, actually, I'm about to start rubbing my hands in glee here because obviously I'm sitting on a nice Ante-Post position with Blood Destiny. Thought I'd get that in there again. So I was rather hoping that we wouldn't see a blistering performance from Lottie Mouth. Indeed, we didn't. Obviously, she had some big problems in running, was inconvenienced coming down the back straight and then had to go wide around the home. And Gala Marceau got first run. She ended up winning. I thought she won pretty impressively in the end. Lossiemouth most definitely had excuses. I thought Willie Mullins was a bit harsh on Paul Tannant afterwards, kind of ostracising him in the media, which I never really liked to see. But it was a good performance from Gala Marceau. I think the best filly in the race, best horse in the race, was probably Lossiemouth. Nothing really went her way. But it does throw the Triumph hurdle open a little bit more and gives the likes of Blood Destiny a bigger chance. And we duly saw him cut and Lossiemouth drifting out a little bit. Jake, what did you make of all the Triumph hurdle shenanigans?
Yeah, well, I don't know the relevance of it, but I did have a look before the race to see if there was ever a horse that's been, through every single graded race in Ireland in the juvenile division. So she won at Ferryhouse, the grade 3, Leopardstown, the grade 2, and then now she's running, obviously ran in the spring juvenile. And no horse had ever done it, and no horse had ever actually won the Ferryhouse grade 3 and gone on to win the Triumphs. But I think with her, we may actually see a horse that could very possibly do that. She's been quite stunning in the fact that she's kept on progressing alongside all the other juveniles throughout the season. As you mentioned, she got severely unlucky here, got a good 6 lengths taken out of her, track position lost. As you said, she had to then switch to the wide outside to make her challenge. I thought that Takao was actually going to win the race at one point, which would have blown his Blue Eagles mark completely. But he would have got a severe telling off there, Mark Walsh. But he faded back into third. He's been put up £7 to 128. I think that's pretty lenient, to be honest, for him. So he could definitely be a Boodles contender. And then, I'd imagine, obviously, the Triumph for the first two, and I'd probably see Lossiemouth overturning that form. And as you said, the fly on the ointment is Blood Destiny, and whether he can now become the best juvenile in the division.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Dan, what do you think? Do you think Lossiemouth is still the one to beat?
Interesting that in that whole monologue, not a single mention of Gala Marceau, the winner. That just think it tells you the mind state of literally pretty much everyone, it seems. I think she's being written off very unfairly, Gala Marceau. I liked everything she did there. Look, on her debut in Ireland, she did everything wrong. And here she did pretty much everything wrong again. If you watch the first, quarter of the race back, they were going a pretty strong pace. That's when she settled the best. And then after that, when they slowed down, her kind of keen antics kind of resurfaced again. But considering that, to then kick away in the style that she did and have enough left at the end to power away. And it was a pretty impressive performance to pull well clear of Takao, considering they were neck and neck on the bend. Like, that was impressive to have that much left. And she's a proper, I think, staying 2-mile type. Like, she's got plenty of stamina. She wasn't stopping at the end at all. And I still think there's more improvement to come from her. Would she have beaten Lossiemouth with a clear run? Probably not, but I think she would have got a lot closer than she did the last day. And given that she's the inexperienced one of the two, she's still doing more wrong than Lossiemouth is during her races. Her jumping wasn't the best. I still see the Triumph Hurdle test really suiting her. And if a Blood Destiny and maybe something else can go a consistently strong pace out in front and allows her to settle, I think she's got a chance in the Triumph. And I think it's going to be tough for anything to give her £7. Like, she's a proper filly. And I think in the build-up to Cheltenham, she will be consistently underestimated. And I think that's unfair.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely class. Yeah, no one's really mentioned Gala Marceau too much afterwards, have they? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Really good, cogent argument there, Dan, I have to say. Very impressive indeed. As always, let's talk about the Irish Arkle, which I have to say didn't disappoint. It was a cracker, a really good renewal. Appreciated and Dyson Dynamo found El Fabiolo a little bit too hot in the double green of Simon Muir and Isaac Swade. Lovely performance. I thought this is a horse who is catapulted his way into the Arkle reckoning. I thought he had a pretty good chance beforehand, not the same chance that he has now. I thought it was a really impressive performance. He didn't jump particularly well in the main, made a crucial mistake at a crucial point, but still won going away in very impressive fashion. Now, John Bonn and El Fabiolo faced off last year over hurdles, if you know, at Aintree, and it got very, very tight in the end. There wasn't much between them over hurdles at the end of the season. I don't think there's a huge amount between now over fences, to be honest. It could end up being a jumping game as far as I'm concerned, because we know how well John Bonn jumps, and El Fabiolo probably needs to brush it up a little bit in that department. I do, though, think El Fabiolo has possibly got a slightly bigger engine. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Stan, starting with you.
Well, yeah, to do what he did considering the jumping errors, again, puts this down as a serious performance. Obviously, we knew Dysart Dynamo would be one of the ones to make the running and make sure it was a proper test, and he did that. Interesting that nothing really even tried to go with him. No flame bearer, a Visionarian could never really lay up. Nothing else really ever touched him out in front, but it was a consistently strong pace throughout and made sure it was a proper test. And I think once you got down the back, it was only ever El Fabiola and Appreciate It who were ever looking likely to challenge. And they were almost dueling for second all the way down the back. Initially, it looked like El Fabiola had the advantage and Appreciate It out jumped him a couple of times. But once push came to shove and they, despite that bad error at the fourth, El Fabiola was the one still on the bridle the longest. And the way he powered clear after that on that pace it marks it as a serious performance. Like in terms of Irish Arkle performances we've seen down the years, it's up there. And we've seen some very impressive Irish Arkle performers. It's going to be an interesting conversation now in the build-up, as you mentioned, Tom, against John Bon. You could argue it either way in terms of what happened at Aintree. Obviously, you can say with John Bon, oh, he had a hard race in the Supreme, like he probably wasn't at his peak. El Fabiola, you can say it was only second run over hurdles. He was coming from a Tremor maiden to a grade one. Like it was a serious performance there from him. Like you could argue either way, and I'm pretty sure for the next few weeks we're going to hear both cases. For me, I think El Fabiola should be the Arkle favourite based on that run alone. John Bon will not achieve anything in the build-up to the Arkle like that in terms of pure form. And I would be more... if you're going to tell me now I need to have a bet, it'll be El Fabiola all day.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree on that, I have to say. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I echo most of Dan's thoughts, to be honest. If I look away from El Fabiola, obviously it was a great performance. He achieved a rating of 159 now in Ireland for that. The rest achieved 152. The two horses who finished second and fourth in the end, and obviously Banbridge as well. But yeah, if I look at some of the other horses in behind, then you've got Appreciate It, who apparently may now step up and trip, is what Willie was kind of hinting at on his media day. That would be interesting. The Joseph O'Brien horse, he's definitely said that he's going to be stepping up to the Turners, so Banbridge will be there, which is good to see as well. And then Dysart Dynamo, I assume, will just stay in the Arkle, and I don't think it's 1,000,000 to 1 that he could get it all his own way on the day and run an absolute stormer. Obviously, it looks unlikely now with El Fabiola putting him away very, very easily, but they were very close together right up until the last. If Daniel Mullins can get his fractions better, even better at Cheltenham, then it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But with all that being said, yeah, El Fabiola versus John Bon is going to be a tantalising battle up the hill, isn't it?
It certainly is. So hopefully that will be the case. They both make it safe and sound inside the final furlong. Right, from the 2 miles, we got to the 3 miles for the Irish Gold Cup. Galopin des Champs winning very impressively in my book. I was quite surprised to see him drifting in the market. I thought there's no reason to do that because he's won really well. Hit the line very strongly, got hampered a little bit by Fury Road, who I think is a very useful tool at his best at Leopardstown. He still won going away, which I thought was very impressive. And, I think he's really going to take a very good one to beat him at Cheltenham. Jake, what did you think?
Yeah, I was very impressed by the way that he powered away at the last, because obviously he did look in a bit of bother, should we say, but when up against Fury Road there. But the distance he put between himself and Fury Road, after the last, I thought was very, very impressive. He asserted very strongly. And by all accounts, he took an age to pull up after the race as well. So in terms of Cheltenham prospects, that obviously bodes well for his chances. Like you, I was surprised to see him drift for the race, especially as Statler got supported for the race. Really, he got cut in. He's now as low as 6 to 1, which I thought, as much as I like Statler and think he could be a good each way bet, 6 to 1, he's going to be bigger on the day than that, surely. I can't get my head around that. I was hoping to get like about 10 to 1 on Statler, as to put up against him each way, and knowing he's going to stay all day. But yeah, I think that's a bit too short now. So I'm just going to be waiting. But Galopin des Champs is clearly the horse they've all got to beat in the Gold Cup, and he proved that here.
Yeah, Dan, would you agree?
I don't know if it's just me, but like through the entirety of that race, I was very unimpressed by the way he was going and jumping. Like I thought he looked sticky at most of his fences. Like he seemed to be losing ground. I think he went off 1 to 3, didn't he? And I think I looked him running. He hit like 1.8, which honestly I thought it might be a little bit bigger because he didn't look to be going that well. Obviously, in the end, it's looked impressive. And if you just look at the form book and video, you see a 13 length or so success and strong at the line, and you're thinking that's perfect for what you want for a Gold Cup. But I don't know, there was just something about it, the way he was going through that race and undulating track round Cheltenham again. Like if he jumps like that in a Gold Cup, I'm just thinking, comparing him to a horse like Braveman's Game, who we know will jump better and will take lengths out of him at most fences if he continues to jump with a bit of hesitation. I don't know. I just wasn't all that blown away. Like, his price is what it is. Like, it's on ability, correct, like absolutely correct favorite. And he's done a lot right there in terms of the way he's hit the line. I guess with people sometimes crabbing the idea that he might stay 3 mile 2, that wouldn't be my concern. My concern would be if he does that jumping issues at crucial times at Cheltenham, whether he'll be able to get away with it against a few higher quality rivals. Because for as much as you say Fury Road, I've never really rated Fury Road that highly, and I guess Statler never looked like getting competitive in what was a fairly modestly run race as well. Like, it was never going to suit him 3 miles on a fairly tepid tempo. So I don't know, just I wasn't as enamored as you two. Let's put it that way.
Well, it's good to have some opposition against the general status quo. I would be surprised, I have to say, if Galopin Des Champs got beat. I actually think his main danger could be Braveman's Game later on, but we'll come to that another day. Let's move on then to Sandown and to Jerry Colombe. Delighted that he won. Delighted that Gordon Elliott has now said he's going for the Brown Advisory, and he thinks he's got a very good chance in that race, and I do as well. I was a little bit concerned halfway up the running when Balco Coastal went past him, but Jerry Colombe has got nothing, if not a huge amount of guts, and he just kept on rolling and went past in the closing stages. Were you impressed, Dan?
Yeah, I really like this horse. He's just one of those where there's so much I like about him, the way he goes about things. I think it was the final railway fence he missed, and obviously never great to miss any of those. And that's when he started to look like he was in trouble and pushed along at a fairly early stage for a race at Sandown, but kept finding, and in the end won a shade cosily at the end, looking like a horse that we've all kind of known for a while that this horse is a 3 mile plus all day, really. So to do that at a 2 mile fall at Sandown, and what the ground was being described as on the quick side by most of the jockeys there as well, which wouldn't be his absolute optimal, but it was a very fair performance. Obviously, Balco Coastal was a horse I have a lot of time for. Like, if he didn't run there that well, like, I would have loved him for something like the Plate, but he's gone up to 151. I think he jumped left all the way. He'll be an interesting horse at Aintree, I think, in the Grade 1 there. Thunder Rock was 5 lengths behind. Like, he was 3 lengths down to the real whacker previously, so that paints that form in a decent light. He ran a very similar race, to be fair. Didn't jump well and then stayed on again, so maybe he's just not up to Grade 1 standard. But as a whole, yeah, Jerry Colombe, an awful lot to like about him. He's the one I'd want to be on side with for the Brown Advisory, and I think that's quite a winnable race as well. So, yeah, I think you're sitting pretty there, Tom.
Yeah, well, I hope so, and I hope Jake agrees with that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Pretty much every single like tipping column and podcast and stuff that do the weekend previews, we're all saying that he couldn't be winning on that ground. He couldn't be winning over that trip. And he's proven them all wrong. I get obviously trying to take on short price favorites. It's what people do, but did seem to be a bit of a bandwagon. As I've mentioned previously on this podcast, he's won on yielding ground. Obviously, it's quicker than what he would ideally like, but he's absolutely stayed on strongly up the hill and proven that 3 miles is going to be his bag, which is what he gets next in the Brown Advisory. I'm looking forward to that. He was my nap of the festival a couple of weeks ago as well. So yeah, I'm absolutely all over Jerry Colombe. Absolutely love him, and think he's definitely going to win that Brown Advisory.
Yeah, up the Jerry. We love to hear it. Day 2 of the Dublin Festival saw probably for me the best performance of the weekend in Mighty Potter. I think he's a serious horse, a wonderful jumper, and I think he's going to be very hard to beat in the Turners. It wasn't the best race in the world in the end, I don't think, but he was impressive. Jake, do you think he's the Turners winner?
He's got everything going for him, that's for sure. As you said, I don't think it was the strongest race. Obviously, James de Burley kind of blew out. Gala de Menil, we knew wanted further than 2 miles 5 around Leopardstown. And then, away from that, the rest of the horses, you wouldn't be seeing them as Cheltenham winners, would you? But then again, if you look at the Turners market, there's not exactly too much that's going to come and take him on at Cheltenham that could turn that table around. So you've got Banbridge, obviously, who I mentioned and appreciate it, who may stay up and trip from the 2 mile division. Obviously, there aren't known quantities over the 2.5 mile trip for the main. But Mighty Potter would definitely have a favourites chance. And yeah, I'm sure that Gordon will have him primed to the minute to run a big race.
Yeah, I think Gordon has got 2 of the hot prospects, isn't he, in the novice chase division with Jerry Colombe and with Mighty Potter as well. Dan, what did you think of Mighty Potter?
He's a horse I've kind of come full circle on, to be honest. Like after his chase debut, I was very unimpressed. And I just thought he looked clumsy and a bit awkward and a bit like a horse who probably needed another year or two. And I guess I kind of kept that opinion even after the Drimore. Like I just kind of thought I'd made my mind up. And then when it came to the weekend, I rewatched that race. And I just kind of had an epiphany. Like I've just been too stubborn on this horse for the whole season. Like he's still a bit awkward. He does make the odd error, but in the Drimore, after every fence, he was taking a pull. Like he was just traveling like a horse who was just on a bit of a different level to everything else. And it was a similar story here at the weekend. Like he is just a proper horse. And I think it'll be an image that gives Gordon Elliott a lot of satisfaction for a long time. Marty Potter coming clear of the 5 Willie Mullins horses chasing him down. Like that will be framed somewhere in the office. It has to be, because that won't happen very often. But it was, I'd say, not Willie Mullins' finest crop in behind, as Jake's already mentioned. I think Appreciate It would give him a sterner test than anything in that race. Was he disappointed to see James de Burle basically not jump a fence of the first 4 or 5 and ruin his chance straight away? Domino, we know, doesn't want 2 mile 5, so stiffer test will await in terms of if Appreciate It steps up to 2.5. But look, I think you're hard pressed to not like Marty Potter at this stage. Like he travels like a proper animal, and he's the correct favourite for the Turners at this stage for sure. This camera is doing my head in, by the way.
Well, you still look good, mate. That's the main thing.
Oh, you charmer.
Let's go on to one of the weirdest races of the weekend, which was the Dublin Chase that saw Blue Lord beaten by Gentleman de Me, which threw the Champion Chase even wider open, really. And Edwardstone, having met with a setback, we heard a little bit earlier on, just muddies the waters yet further. I didn't know what to make of it at all. So luckily, I'm relying on you form gurus to try and make sense of it. But the only thing I can think of was that Blue Lord just ran a bit flat and Gentleman de Me ran a little bit above himself. But I don't know if it's quite as simple as that, Dan.
I guess we just saw the entry of Gentleman de Me to a certain extent. Like he pops up once a year with a show-stopping performance once he gets a bit of quicker ground. And when he gets into a rim out in front, he's a very, very good horse. I guess Blue Lord he's never been like a reliable top grade 1 performer. I guess if I was looking at that race with hindsight again, you could say that there was a standout performance before that, but previously, had he looked a horse capable of repeating that, you'd probably say no if you were the glory of hindsight. But yeah, like with Gentleman de Me, I guess the main takeaway is that it adds another pace angle to the Champion Chase. Like if he rocks up there against Editor G out in front, it poses the question of how do you try and ride a Nergamine again? Like, do you try and send him forward and take on, or do you hinder the chance with Gentleman de Me and not ride him in that style? Like that presents a tactical question, which the Mullins team will be trying to figure out. I'm sure. If anything, it plays out how I'd think it would do, and if the setback isn't too serious to Edwardstone, it would just firm up my opinion that Edwardstone will probably get that race run to very much suit him. But I wouldn't be in a rush to back Gentleman de Me at Cheltenham. I'm not necessarily sure that's his kind of track. Maybe Aintree again, or a flatter track in general might be more his thing. But yeah, it's disappointing to have Blue Lord not be one of those we can consider for the Champion Chase really with much depth. But still, plenty of interesting conversations to be had about the Champion Chase in the weeks to come.
Yes, certainly are. I think that tactical point is a really good one, actually. Jake, what did you make of it?
I think that Gentleman de Me, as Dan mentioned, just needs that better ground. I think the quicker it is, the better you'll see him. Flatter track probably does help him as well. So yeah, I can see that the angle of Cheltenham not really being his bag. But something like Punchestown at the end of the season, if they kept him fresh for that, like he could really do some damage against horses that have had hard seasons in the Champion Chases, etc. So yeah, I think he's a good horse on his day when he gets his right conditions. And obviously Danny Mullins gave him a great ride, the Sandian rider, after Mark Welsh's had to pull out. So yeah, I think Blue Lord, as you said, just ran a bit flat. Perhaps maybe the Ryanair trip might suit him better. I don't know. I think either way, that going into the Champion Chase, you'd be now looking back at the race at Cheltenham the week before rather than this week.
Yeah, I think Willie Mullins has got a couple of conundrums about the Champion Chase, hasn't he? In more ways than one. Let's move on to the novice hurdle for Facile Vega. Really disappointing. We've seen how fast he went off. I think that can possibly be overlooked a fair bit. Interested to get your thoughts on it. I'm going to talk about Il Était Temps just a little bit, so I won't dwell too long on this. But Jake, Facile Vega, do you think he can bounce back?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I actually watched a video. I'm sorry, I completely forgot to note down the name of who posted it on Twitter. But someone posted a video of the two runs. So you got the Irish champion hurdle and the 2 mile novice hurdle side by side, synchronized together. And yeah, in the novice hurdle, they were just miles ahead. High definition Festival Vega, yeah, they just absolutely cut each other's throats at the front. Obviously, Willie was again not very happy with Paul Townend in the post race interview on this one, but yeah, I think that's the question now, isn't it? Is how much of a mark this run is going to leave on Festival Vega, because its price, I think it reached 5 to 1. I don't know if it's still 5 to 1, but I think there's fours out there. I mean, if he was that price before this weekend, obviously that would be massive. So if you can put a line through this run, then I can still see him running well at Cheltenham. It's just how much is this race going to take out of him? In terms of Ante-Post, I thought that again, Danny Mullins was very shrewd, just stood off that pace and tracked it through, and then when it collapsed, he took it up and went on and won nicely. Ante-Post has always been a nice horse. He's always been one that I've been a fan of, and to be honest, I wanted him in the county hurdle, so it's kind of a shame he's blown that now. But yeah, it was a very interesting race. I just, yeah, that's the $1 million question now, isn't it? Is how much it's taken out of Festival Vega.
Yeah, it's really hard to say, isn't it? We don't know how much energy that would have taken or used up, as you say. Dan, same question to you, really. Do you think Festival Vega is done?
Done would be harsh, but I think it would be borderline unprecedented for a horse to come back off such a disappointing run and go into Supreme and win. I guess the only one vaguely similar would be LeBake, and he refused the run before, so it wasn't really the same. It's not common for a horse to be well beaten and then win the Supreme. Admittedly, circumstances are always different, and there are extenuating ones here. As you say, the pace is a factor. I would just err on the side of caution between direct comparisons with that and the champion, because they're almost on two sides of the spectrum. Like the Festival Vega was far too quick. State Man was very slow. Like he was able to dictate a very slow pace, which we'll discuss shortly. So I wouldn't be holding that exact comparison as a reason. Well, look, he's going like 50 lengths clear of State Man. It must have been too quick. I think they're just very, very differently run races, albeit same trip on the same day. That can happen. It's interesting. I guess Paul will be ruining the fact that when high definition on that he didn't take that moment, because it was only the fourth hurdle, just to try and get a breather in. Like he continued on pretty relentlessly, and ultimately that has definitely contributed to his underperformance. I will just give a note to Dark Raven. I feel like obliged to, after obviously he was a 33 to 1 poker mine for the Ballymore. But considering this was his first run outside of Maiden Company, coming back from a 2-year absence, he was the least experienced of the field. I thought he ran a really, really good race. His jumping wasn't good on his main hurdle, really. He was a bit sticky. It was the same here again. And yet, despite doing the same thing, there was a moment turning for home where he loomed up outside. And I thought, oh my God, he's actually going to go and win. He's going to run in Supreme. And I'm going to back another novice hurdler who won't run in the race. Ultimately, couldn't quite go through with it, but there was no shame in that. Ante-Post is a very good horse, has always promised to be, and finally settled for the first time and could finally deliver on that promise. But Dark Raven ran an absolute cracker, only narrowly denied for second against a proven 2 mile 4 horse who's already won a grade 2. And if you look at official ratings over in Ireland, he's only rated £2 below Goodland. So, I mean, he needs to step up in trip. Like, clearly, he looked pretty flat out throughout that. I think 2 mile 5 will definitely suit him more. I think he's now, a 14 to 20 chance, like in general across the board, non-runner, no bet. Like he would be a lively outsider for a race that may cut up slightly once the chips eventually fall into place. So haven't given up the ghost for Dark Raven whatsoever, because that was a very impressive run under the circumstances.
Yeah, I think nor should you, because he's clearly a very talented horse indeed. Lastly, the Dublin Racing Festival saw a cracking renewal of the Irish Champion Hurdle, which in the end was won by State Man very impressively, actually. A nice ride this time from Paul Townend, who controlled the pace with aplomb. This was a fascinating contest in more ways than one, and gave us a fair insight into what can possibly challenge, if anything, Constitution Hill. Dan, what was your take?
Like you say, Tom, it was, I guess, in a couple of days where Paul Townend was taking pelters left, right, and centre from the team behind him, this was a ride he got spot on. Like, I think even in the post-race interview, Willie Mullins was a bit concerned, briefing Paul rather, that he said he was going to make the running. But I mean, he kind of had to. There was nothing else in this race that could really go. The only one who would have even contemplated running forward would have been Zanna here, who just wouldn't. Well, he actually tried to briefly be prominent, but just doesn't have the pace to hold it. Even a slowly run 2 miles, he just can't do it. So it was absolutely the correct tactical decision. He's a horse who's matured and is learning to jump better, so it was time to take advantage of that. And ultimately, he kind of just got it his own way out in front. And an older, aging Honeysuckle at this stage of her career in a slowly run 2 miles was never going to have the turn of foot required to mount a challenge. Obviously, then you had Vauban, who, again, ridden patiently in a slowly run race. That's never going to suit tactically, just wouldn't work out for him. And Pied Piper, who had been previously well beaten, was still bang there. And the finishing distances between them would suggest and prove that it was a slowly run affair. Ultimately, it's going to need another effort 10 pounds higher and above for Stateman to challenge Constitution Hill on this evidence. He's the right second favourite. It'll be an interesting matchup come the day. I guess the worrying thing would be how many are going to line up in the champion hurdle at this stage. Like, it could be a pretty small field, all things considered, but he's still some way off Constitution Hill. And for all that they're both young, improving horses, it's hard to really see where he's going to find that improvement come the day.
Yeah, I actually said to a couple of mates the other day that I think if Constitution Hill ran in any of the Cheltenham races at the festival, he'd win. It doesn't matter what trip. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter who he's up against. I think he's just that good. Jake, what do you think of? Yeah, well,
Chin by Billaway.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine the scenes.
That really would be legendary. Jake, what did you think about that brilliant Irish champion hurdle? Although in a way, I suppose you could say it was a touch disappointing given that tactical bias that didn't help Vauban at all.
Yeah, it was a shame we didn't see like a proper battle, but as Dan said, Stateman, controlled it perfectly from the front, and he's gone away and won it in the style of an improving, decent horse. Do I think he's good enough to beat Constitution Hill? No, probably not. But it's good to see a horse that's capable of trying to get close to him and give him a challenge, as reflected by his price. So yeah, it is a proper change in the guard race, as we'll mention in a minute. But Stateman's a very, very likable horse, that's for sure.
He certainly is, which brings us nicely on to Honeysuckle and the news that has come out about the fact that she's going to be going the mare's route rather than the champion hurdle. I'll start with this. I think it's absolutely the right decision. It is a big shame we won't see the returning champion in the champion hurdle, but if she did run, she wouldn't see which way Constitution Hill went, and she would get beaten comprehensively again by Stateman. I can't see the point of just making her look a shadow of her former self. Whereas in the mares, which I have to say I think is a really hot race as well, she at least will hopefully run into first or second. I don't necessarily think she's going to win that either personally, but it's the more prudent option in terms of where she's most likely to win. And I completely understand it, and I think it's very fair enough. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the correct decision. In terms of connections, that they gave two options after the race, didn't they? They said, the mare's hurdle or retirement. And now people are trying to bring in today the third option of the champion hurdle, that she should be running there. I don't see it. I agree with you. I don't see her overturning that former Stateman. I don't see her getting near Constitution Hill. So yeah, I at the end of the day, I think it boils down to, would you rather see her at the festival or would you rather see her retired? And considering she wasn't retired on the spot and giving a hero's return like she would have been done at Leopardstown, then yeah, I think it's right that she, she's a grade 1 horse who's finished second in 2 grade 1s, albeit she has regressed. She's still, placed in 2 grade 1s, and she goes to the festival fit, ready to go. So why not see her run one more time? As you say, whether she's got a chance of winning the mares or not, it's a hot race. There's no Benny Dedu that she had to beat last time. So it will be interesting. It'll be, it makes the race even better than it already looks. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad she's running. And I'm with you. I think it's 100% the correct decision.
Cool. 2 correct calls. Will Dan make it a trio?
I just, something doesn't sit right. What would be more detrimental to her legacy? Losing to Constitution Hill and Stateman at Cheltenham, or getting beat in the mare's hurdle? Both obviously very plausible situations should she run in either race. I mean, almost certainly the latter. Like, she went out on her shield defending 2-time champion in the champion hurdle. Imagine the scenes if she even gave for a brief second Constitution Hill something to think about. There's a brief moment where she's there, where the race is more strongly run than the Irish champion. She looks actually like a threat. even doing that, I think would be more beneficial to her legacy. If that's the main concern here, which it seems to be, that would be more beneficial to her than even winning the Mayor's Hurdle. I don't think that would even be remembered, really, when push comes to shove. They'll remember the 2 champion hurdles. They'll remember the undefeated streak. They probably won't worry all that much about the final race at Cheltenham in the Mayor's Hurdle. I just don't see it. And I'm not being funny, but this is top-level sport. This isn't a primary school sports day. It's not everyone gets a medal. Like, ultimately, the best should still be challenging the best all the way up. That's how legends are made. Even towards the end, it's the great stories of the horses who look beaten, who look like they're out of it, and then come back and prove them wrong. Like, that's how I like to see sport, and that's what I like to see. And it wouldn't exactly be an unprecedented shock that she could turn the tables on State Man. Like, it was a solid run race that he dictated. We've seen Irish champion hurdle form reversed at Cheltenham before. See Jeski and Hurricane Fly being an example. Hardy Eustace and Brave Inca. Like, it happens. They're different tests. And also, like, if you were going to, and this is our last season, why don't you go champion hurdle, then punch us down for the Mayor's race at the end of the season? Over 2.5. You could do both. She's only had 2 runs this season so far. I don't know. I just think we're missing an opportunity for even something more legendary she already is. Like, it just seems, look, we got the Mayor's Hurdle stacking up well and great, but I don't know. I just feel that the potential storyline for what could be is missing now. Maybe that's just me being a cynical old bugger, but I don't know. I just feel like this is top-level sport, and it should be the best taking on the best at all times.
We'll still see an absolutely massive reception, though. If she comes in and wins that Mayor's Hurdle, it will be huge.
Yeah, but it's a Mayor. It's like, well, you were a 2-time defending champion in the better race earlier.
You guarantee that if she wins that Mayor's Hurdle, everyone's going to say, "Oh, how do you think she would have run the champion hurdle had she run it?" Wouldn't they?
Exactly. It's honest. It's a no-win situation, really. At least you're running the champion. No one's expecting you to win. You can go out on your sword, and if you go and push it close, then wow. And at the age of 9 against the great horse Constitution Hill, you pushed him close. You made him have a race. That's a better way to go out than winning the Mayor's Hurdle, in my opinion.
Fair enough. I suppose you can look at it from 2 sides of the coin, can't you? Whether they just really want to get that victory to see her out on her sword, or or they go in the champion. And then there's, in my opinion, there's no chance you can get close to Constitution Hill, and I think they all know that as well. So they're probably thinking, what's the best chance we can get a victory? And the Mayor's Hurdle is it. But absolutely get your point. You definitely can argue both sides of the coin for sure. Right, time to move on now to the moment you've all been waiting for. It is our selections Ante-Post for the Cheltenham Festival. This week, if it's all right with the lads, I'm going to go first, actually, because we've already talked about this horse earlier on in the show, and I'd like to reiterate some of the claims that were put forward and come up with some of my own as well. And that horse is Il Était Temps for the Supreme. Now, 5-1 isn't the biggest price Ante-Post selection I'm putting up in this series, that is for sure, but I was mightily, heartily, and overwhelmingly impressed by his performance, I have to say, on the weekend. I thought it was a really good effort. Obviously, Facile Vega bombed out. We all know that. If you put him out of the race, take him aside, he is defeated this field by 9.5 lengths. In the pocket in second, was unbeaten before this. In weaker races, granted, he probably wants further as well. But he was destroyed by this horse. Dark Raven, unbeaten before this as well. A horse with great amount of potential. Again, didn't see which way he went. I think he needs good ground to be seen at his best, this horse. Let's say so. On soft ground, he ran 4 lengths second to Facile Vega in a race that very much suited the winner at Leopardstown. That came before the performance on Sunday. That was over Christmas. So it was a more than valiant effort and good ground. Very much likely to see him in even better light. So a horse who I think is very much going on the up. But the thing that's really turned his form around for me is the addition of a hood. A first-time hood that was brought in at Thurles in November. He was a horse last year. He was always reefing, always pulling, could never settle, and was never able to use that energy in a profitable way. That's completely changed with the addition of that headgear. He just settles much more, or he's much more relaxed. He settles much better. He's a more natural traveller now than he ever was. And with that in mind, I think he's got untapped potential, particularly on fast ground, which I think is really going to suit him. Cheltenham is going to have a very strong pace. It always does in the Supreme, particularly the field we're likely to have. And that's also going to suit him. And the way that he careered away in the closing stages at Leopardstown suggested to me that he has got to have a massive chance, and a horse who is going from strength to strength. And I think given the bomb out of Facile Vega, this was overlooked a little bit. So for me, a 5-1 about a horse who's won one of the big trials for this by 9.5 lengths, head in chest, really sprinting away from them, and who's pretty unexposed on the ground over 2 miles with a fast pace and with a hood on, he'll do for me. Let's see what you think, Jake.
Yeah, no, it's a fair shout. This week, I'm going to be going to the Albert Bartlett, and to be honest, I was expecting this week to put up a horse that had run at the Dublin Racing Festival. It's generally what happens after this weekend, but it was actually a horse that didn't run in the Nathaniel Lacey that impressed me. He got his form boosting nicely, and that's Hidden Valley Lake for Henry de Bromhead. So if I just go through, obviously, the profile of the horse, so he won a 2 mile free furlong maiden hurdle at Naas in November, and that maiden's worked out pretty nicely with Santonito in second. He's rated 137, and Ava Grace was in third, and she's bolted up since as well. So the form looks decent for the maiden. He then went to the 3 mile Grade 3 Stayers novice hurdle at Cork in early December, and he absolutely hacked it. Really, he came off the bridle in entering the home straight under Rachel, and he just took off after, just coming down to the second last. He put 8 lengths between himself and Cool Survivor, who, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I thought he ran a very eye-catching race in the Nathaniel Lacey. He's rated 135. I thought he was more of a stale, but obviously Gordon seems to think that he can go down the handicap route, which is fine. But in terms of the performance, I still thought that in that Grade 3 Sayers novice hurdle, he really did put down a performance that marked him as a very strong Albert Bartlett contender, and as such, obviously, it chucked into the head of the market. The form of that race, as I said, is working out okay because Cool Survivors ran 4th in that Grade 1, and let's be clear about it, it's also bolted up since, and he finished 4th in the race. So the form looks decent there. And the next time we'll see Hidden Valley Lake is actually next week. So on this Thursday, we'll see the entries for Clonmel next Thursday. And he's going to be running in the Grade 3 Mercedes-Benz novice hurdle. So that's a 3 mile novice hurdle again. And it shouldn't be a deep ribbon. I haven't seen too many trainers talking about it. Perhaps Favori de Champdou may go there. I don't know. But other than that, it's actually a race that Henry de Bromhead loves to use. So Monolith won it in 2017 and then finished second in the Bartlett. Chris's Dream won it in 2018, finished 9th in the Bartlett. Allaho beat Manila Rindo in it in 2019, and then Manila Rindo obviously went and won the Bartlett. And then Chantues won it last year, and he only finished 10th, but still it's a key trial that Henry de Bromhead uses for the Albert Bartlett. So it's a race that stacks up. His form's stacking up. I thought, by the way that he beat Cool Survivor was much more convincing than, say, an Absolute Notions, who had him a couple lengths behind. Sander Clegane as well, a horse that's been tilted for the Bartlett. He finished right upsides. So to me, Hidden Valley Lake looks the horse to be beating. He's 11-2 non-runner no bet, which I think is still fair because Embassy Gardens is obviously in there at a shorter price in places, and I just can't have that at all. Hidden Valley Lake is by far the better horse, and if he goes and wins that Grade 3 next week, then I think he'll be, a fairly short favourite, probably half in price, maybe around 5-2, that type of area. So yeah, Hidden Valley Lake is going to be my latest selection.
Lovely stuff, Jake. Thanks very much for that. Hidden Valley Lake for you. And Dan, what about you? Well, we can all agree Good Lamb would have won the Bartlett, but let's move on. I won't stew on it. So mine's going to come in the plate. And interestingly, for anyone who's listened to me or had the displeasure of listening to me for a few years, I guess my gimmick has been that the Kim Muir is my favourite race. But I think this now marks me putting a tip up in every handicap chase bar the Kim Muir so far. So clearly I'm just moving on. I'm evolving as a pundit, I guess, these days. But my selection did run at the Dublin Racing Festival. Many wouldn't have seen him because he spent most of his time out the back of the telly. And that's Fast or Slow, as I said, for the plate, 16-1, number no bet. He's a fascinating horse. He came to Ireland having won over hurdles and fences in France as a 3-year-old. Made him an absolute nightmare to place, but clearly talented. One of those runs over hurdles, he was behind Galeo Conti, who was one of the top French horses of like 2020s and the 2021. So he had to run in competitive handicaps as a result, basically from the get-go, always over 2 miles, including in the Liffey. I think that was one of his first starts over in Ireland. But once he stepped up to intermediate trips last year in handicaps, that's when he really started to show what he was all about. He's second in the Coral Cup of 141, only narrowly denied that day. That was his first handicap start over intermediate trip. And then he was second at Punchestown off 144. Again, great run, staying on at the end. Probably wanted it ideally a bit further than the 2 mile free on good ground around Punchestown that day. But it marked him down as a horse with some serious ability. Back over the fences this season. look, again, because he wasn't a novice and he only had one chase start to his name, it's really, really tough going for them. So he basically made his Irish chase debuts and senior reappearance in the John Durkan. That's such an inexperienced horse, which is always going to be a very tough ask. He was wide for out, but jumped really well. Like, he was in a handy position for a long way, ran well for a very, very long way. And considering his 66-1 shot that day, he traded at about 15-1 in running, kind of giving you the impression that, how long, this horse is actually going better than anyone could really expect. Ultimately, he was beaten fairly comfortably in the end, fifth, obviously galloping to Champ out in the field. But Fakir Duderie was only about 8 lengths away. You had Horten Claws only 2 lengths ahead. So that was a huge run, considering it was his chase debut over Irish fences. Like, there's so much to like about that effort. Again, this weekend in the Dublin Chase, 2 miles, dropped out in rear, never competitive, but potted around nicely, jumped well. Nice to see him jump well at a 2-mile pace as well. That's always nice to see, especially when you're looking towards handicap chase in the future, which will be his first should he line up here. And it's left his mark unchanged of 147 currently in Ireland. Obviously, the BHA will have their say, but I'm not sure they can do too much. They don't tend to do too much with chases either. It's always the hurdlers who tend to get more harshly treated. So if he can sneak in off like 149 or something like that, that would be absolutely majestic in my view. Obviously, he's got Cheltenham form in the book from the Coral Cup. He's completely unexposed as a handicap chaser. The 2 times he's lined up in a handicap over intermediate trips over hurdles, we know he thrived. And he's always looked more of a chaser. Like, he's by Saint Descents. Like, he's just is built that way. And if Martin Brazel tends to bring one over for Cheltenham, they're not there for any reason. So City Island won the Ballymore. This horse was second in the Coral Cup. He had the County Hurdle favourite in 2021. Like, it's a select group he brings over. So if he does come over for this, you know they fancy their chances. And I think a more prominent ride again over a 2.5 mile handicap chase is exactly what this horse is looking for. So at 16-1, no bet. If he does line up, I can see him being very popular and going off single figures.
Yeah, I fully endorse that. Absolutely. I think it's a great bet, and I'm going to be putting it up on my Telegram straight after this.
Copy.
There you go. Love it. 2 really strong fancies then there. And 4 overall, actually, I suppose, if you put them all together there to add to your Ante-Post portfolio. Best of luck with all your bets, of course. That is the kind of ringing every week. Lads, thanks very much indeed.
Pleasure as always, my friend. Pleasure as always.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. A real true pleasure. Remember, please, to like and subscribe the Jump Show on Instagram and on Twitter as well. And let us know your takeaways from the Dublin Racing Festival over the weekend. But that's it from us for another week. Thanks very much for watching.